it's really difficult to even kind of get into the mindset, which again, I think when you want to be employee centric, which I think you do have to be, if you want to attract, engage, and retain the best people, you have to kind of like put yourself in the shoes of that employee, right? But a lot of the answers to a lot of the questions about hybrid work always go back to HR foundational principles. And I think that's why McKinsey said, you know, most companies will not go back to 9 to 5, 5 days. Most companies will not go to a Brian Chesky Airbnb style remote work solution. Most companies will choose something in between.
Hi, my name is Ruby Nguyen. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Curious, a professional on-the-job learning network. In other words, you can think of it as LinkedIn for on-the-job learning and development. And today I'm going to host this program. And welcome to People 2032. And thank you for spending your precious Monday with us. You're at the right place because we aim to turn your Monday blue into Monday rainbow, with a lot of great ideas that you're going to hear about. A little bit of introduction about People 2032 is a very special series about the future of work, the future of human resources, the future of people in Vietnam. And is co-produced by VIETSUCCESS and Curious. We are proud to present the very best ideas from leading HR and people experts with global know-how and Vietnam insight. And today, we're going to talk about hybrid workplaces. How we're going to future-proof the future of workplace and the future of work. And a little bit more about the program today. We're going to hear a keynote speech by Daan van Rossum. And then we'll have an interview session where I selected a bunch of questions from you guys sending in advance. And questions that I find I want to challenge Dan about. And then after that, we'll have the live Q&A session where you can ask your own questions as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our feature expert today, Daan van Rossum. And he's the CEO of two really amazing companies, Dreamplex and FlexOS. FlexOS is a platform that helps companies in Southeast Asia launch and manage hybrid workplace with a team of 50 workplace strategists, technology, design, hospitality, and employee experience specialists. I've known Dan for a few years, and I know he's an obsessed investigator of happiness at work. And today I'm going to challenge him on this matter as well. So let's put our hand together. You can clap by yourself in front of the computer. And welcome, Dan. Here you go. I would love to hear from you. What do you have to say about hybrid workplaces?
Great question and great introduction. And thank you so much for having me today, Ruby. So I think I'm going to share my screen. And if that works, then the future of work has arrived. Oh, it seems to be working. Okay, there we go. So, you know, what else can happen? So, hey, everyone. Really nice to have you here on this session. Very much look forward to, as Ruby just said, your best and hardest questions about hybrid work or employee experience or future of work or anything in that realm. So a little bit about what we'll go through today in this first part. So this really is all about hybrid workplaces. How can we future-proof the workplace of the future? So first of all, we'll talk a little bit about developing a hybrid workplace. You know, why should you do it? Why should you not do it? Is the future here to stay? Will it go away now that the pandemic is over? Are your business and your people even ready for hybrid work? But maybe also, what are some of the challenges that companies face when they adopt hybrid work, and what are some strategies that they can use to tackle those challenges? So that's what we'll go through today. A little bit about myself, as this slide template had an about me page in it. So I thought, why not? So as Ruby just shared, I'm the CEO of FlexOS and the CEO of Dreamplex. Before that, I ran a company called Bright, which was a happiness startup. And before that, I worked at Ogilvy for almost 10 years, across their Amsterdam, New York, Chicago, Singapore, and eventually Saigon offices. The reason why we started this new company called FlexOS is because we believe and we see in the market, at least from more innovative companies, that there is now a different way of thinking about the workplace, and that's called hybrid work. So hybrid work is basically, sort of short description, any type of work where it's not fully in the office. It's also not fully remote, but there's some combination of working in the office and working from home, and maybe even working from some third space, like a coffee shop or maybe a co-working space. That's what we call hybrid work, right? So it's a hybrid between kind of work from home and work in the office. And if we believe McKinsey, but I'm sure Ruby will challenge me on this later, but if we would believe McKinsey, then 90% of all companies are going to switch to hybrid work in the next 5 years. And that's a global number. So 90% of all companies globally will switch to some kind of hybrid work over the next 5 years. And that is not really surprising if you look at sort of the demand for hybrid work, not only in Vietnam, but also in the region, is definitely there. So we did a study last year about Gen Z in the workplace. We saw that was done together with Decision Lab. We saw that only 9% of Vietnamese Gen Z wants to work in an office full time. We saw from recent Cisco research earlier this year that most employees also feel that their role can be performed just as effectively when they're at home as they're in the office, which, again, just thinking very simply, like I feel that makes sense, right? What is really in the office that you don't have at home now that you have a laptop and internet anywhere? And then there are specific things like in Vietnam, again, this is from Manpower research, people saying that, hey, actually, if I have more flexible work, if I can work only certain days of the week in the office, that's really good for me because I have to commute less. And commuting, especially now with the increases in fuel, commuting is both extremely expensive, very pollutive, and also it just adds a lot of time onto your workday. And so I think that's why also a lot of employers have seen that, they were so worried about this one thing called productivity. Actually, people who work from home are more productive, not less productive, because you basically skip out on an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of commuting. And that's in Vietnam. When you look into the broader region and you look into more developed markets, like, for example, Singapore, it's not even a demand for hybrid work anymore. It's a must, right? So in Singapore, for example, there was some research that showed that almost 70% of Singaporeans said, if I don't get flexibility in when and where to work, I will quit my job. So again, it's not that bad yet here, but you can sort of imagine, right? Like if you get a little bit further into it, that, once you've kind of experienced flexibility and then your employer says, not anymore, come back to the office 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you may have people saying, yeah, then forget about it. Now, one thing to kind of acknowledge here is that hybrid work is a spectrum, right? Because we said anything that's not, fully at home or fully in the office is hybrid. And that could be something like, you get 4 days in the office and you get 1 day of flexibility. And either you or the company chooses when and where to work. It could be fully flexible, meaning that, you could fully choose when and where to work, or it could be something in between where a company may say, our team, let's say the marketing team or the engineering team, we all come in on Tuesday, and then you have to choose one more flex day per week, and that constitutes the hybrid policy. So depending on the company, hybrid can mean a lot of different things, and that's probably embedded in that idea. McKinsey saying, well, almost every company is going to go through some kind of hybrid work, because hybrid doesn't mean I'm just going to leave it up to the employee and let's see when they come in. It could be something like even 4 days in the office, 1 day at home, and that 1 day is flexible. So that is a little bit about what is hybrid and how does it take place. Now let's look a little bit into why hybrid. So like Ruby said early on, if you have a boss who is saying, hey, I don't like this idea of giving people more freedom, more flexibility, maybe these stats can help you. So quickly screenshot these stats and send them to your boss. So first of all, maybe the most obvious one, if you have less people coming into the office, you can obviously save a lot of money, right? Because you don't need that big of an office anymore. So companies that are already going through the process right now of maybe at the point where they were renewing their lease and they had to choose how much office space do I really need, they may think about the fact that even before COVID, most desks weren't occupied, right? Because even in a traditional office, even before COVID happened, you know, there were people who would be out on client meetings. There would be people who were taking annual leave. There would be people who, for whatever other reason, weren't in the office in that moment. And some international research shows that on average, only 60% of desks were utilized, meaning that 40% was basically sitting empty. That space that you're paying for, right? As a company owner or someone in finance, you're seeing that check that you have to write every day or every month to Dreamplex or someone else. You know, that's a check that you have to write, and usually it's a very expensive one, right? After salaries, it's usually the highest cost that a company has to pay. And so if you're switching to a kind of office where, you know, you have not a desk for every employee, because some employees only come in 1 or 2 days per week, and you can basically share one desk between 2 or 3 people, that means you need a lot less space, right? So that means if you're a fast growing company, you have to rent less additional space. If you're quite consistent in your headcount, it means that you can actually decrease some of your space at your next lease negotiation. And that's real money, right? Imagine if you're spending 30, 40, up to, I can see Deutsche House from here, up to $80 per square meter. If you can save half of your office space and also all the operational cost that comes with it, right? Think about service charge, think about air conditioning, think about everything that you have to do for every square meter of office space. So if you can reduce that by 50%, that's a huge win, right? And then really great, really employee-centric companies reinvest that into employee engagement or into great offsites or something like that. Otherwise, it's just a win, right? You save some money. So that's the first one. The second one is, again, this is kind of what people are expecting. This is kind of what people are wishing, right? So if you can be, especially in this market, one of the more innovative companies, one of the first companies going into this way of working, then it looks extremely attractive from an employer branding perspective. If a candidate can choose between 3, 4 different companies, and 3 of them say, well, you have to come into the office full time, 5 days a week. I don't care where you live. We are in D1. And then you have an option of a company that says, well, the pay is pretty much the same as your other offers. The benefits are very similar. The opportunities for growth are very similar. But actually with us, you can flex even just 2 days per week and giving you more balance between work and life and allowing you to kind of arrange your schedule for when you're most productive or when you're most creative or when you're most engaged. That may be a very compelling reason to attract that person. And I think, again, like for most companies, you know, you're just a group of people, right? So the better that you get at attracting the best people, engaging them and retaining them, that's really what we're talking about. So speaking of retention, anyone here who is in the HR profession knows that there's nothing more expensive for a company, and expensive in a lot of different ways. There's nothing more expensive than losing your best people. It's expensive to lose people. Yes, that's true. But it's especially expensive to lose really good people, right? Imagine all of the knowledge that key manager is taking with them. That's out the door at the moment that they leave, right? Think about all the time it took to train someone into a role, to understand your internal process, your internal ways of working, to make them really efficient, really effective. All of that is out the door the moment that you have to rehire for that position, right? So again, if you kind of can believe that this is a real demand from employees in Vietnam, then, you know, you can also understand why this will be totally a retention booster. And then especially if you look at some of the more recent research, there was a great study from the University of Leeds in May of this year, looking into what actually happens when you give people hybrid work. You know, people like their job better, more engaged, and they're more committed. And so there's been some Stanford research that actually showed a direct proven link between offering hybrid work and employee retention. So, you know, again, if you're trying to convince your boss of why hybrid, I'm sure we'll still run into some critical questions, right, of the why not of hybrid. But if you're trying to convince someone of why hybrid, keep some of these stats in mind. And again, all the sources are here on the slide, and also happy to share that after the fact. So, you know, that's one thing. Then there are obviously a lot of companies that say, yeah, I don't really care about the research because this university here, this university there, this HR researcher who obviously has something to sell, this guy who is running a hybrid work company, of course, they're going to tell me that hybrid work is important. Well, then at least you can say, yeah, but look, everyone is doing it, right? So you're seeing really some of the best brands, and whether they're really large companies or really small, whether they're in a very competitive industry or a normal, more traditional industry, you see just all these companies adapting to hybrid work, right? So in Singapore, one of the key markets that we're in, even very traditional companies like HSBC, DBS, big banks, company like Changi, Manpower Group, Lazada, going to hybrid, right? Here in Vietnam, you see it, right? Heineken, AIA, Baymin, TikTok, Savills, Coca-Cola, all of these companies moving towards hybrid work. That should tell you something, right? So hybrid is clearly attractive. There's clearly a lot of companies that are starting to adapt now this new way of working. Again, that is not to say that there aren't any challenges, right? Any new thing is painful, as we talk internally a lot. I see Ruby nodding, right? It doesn't really matter what you're talking about. Anything new is painful, and that's why there's always such a resistance to introduce these new ways of working, to introduce new models, new systems, because change is hard, change is painful. And as we've been talking, even before we officially launched our hybrid work platform, FlexOS, as we were talking to tens of people in the region, even globally, about, well, you have done the transition to hybrid work. What were really the main pain points for you? We always hear three key things. Number one, the hybrid schedule. Okay, if hybrid is a spectrum, what is the right one for me, for my company? Is it the same for everyone in the company, or is it different by team? What is the right thing to do in terms of giving people that flexibility? And then how do I know that people adhere to it, right? So I could say to people, you can come in 2 days per week. You've earned that flexibility. We want to be a cool employer so that you can take great TikToks about your work-life balance. But how do I actually know that you're coming in those 2 days per week? Because if we're giving you that flexibility, you know, maybe you come in Monday, Tuesday, but I, as the manager, come in Thursday, Friday, I may get this like nagging feeling that you're never in the office, where actually you were just there, but different days, right? So measuring compliance to the policy is something that companies care about a lot. And then also having the data to improve that policy over time, right? If we see certain teams doing extremely well within that hybrid policy, but other teams extremely poorly, what can the teams that are doing really well transfer to the teams that are doing poorly in terms of how to have great hybrid work teams? And then also, you know, maybe should the hybrid guideline be adjusted based on what works for that team? So that's a really big thing that companies run into. And that's, again, every transition is painful. Every new thing is painful, but it's one of those things where, again, measurement and data does help a lot, and creating that sense of clarity with people. The second one is the hybrid office itself, right? So I said very nicely, oh, you know, you can save 50% on all your office expenses if you just decrease the size of your office. But obviously there's a big difference between going to the office, trying to remember when that was still the case for me, going to my office maybe 3 or 4 years ago and walking into the room and having a desk with a monitor and my personal belongings and probably a stack of paperwork I need to review. Or going into a hybrid office where it's all empty desk, clean desk policy, all lockers, no drawers, right? You have to reserve a desk maybe ahead of time, and making sure that there's a good balance between the amount of seats that you have and also the amount of meeting rooms and phone booths that are now important, maybe more than ever. Having a good balance between the amount of space that you have and the amenities you have in the office, and then what people need, right? The worst case scenario is that on certain days, all of your people show up and everyone's complaining that there's no space, there's no desk available, there's no room available. And then on other days, the office being completely empty, right? So managing that hybrid office is another really big pain point for companies. And then, you know, again, the thing that probably we care about the most, which is how do you make sure that if people only come in once or twice a week, or even if they are in the office 3 days a week, but their colleagues are choosing 3 different days, how do you still feel connected to the company, to the culture, to the sense of community, the sense of belonging of being in that company? How do you avoid the risk that is definitely out there, where if you're just doing everything like right now from behind the Zoom screen, you know, maybe changing jobs is as easy as changing my Zoom login, right? So I want to avoid that as a company. And therefore, those things become way, way, way more important. So yes, there are a lot of challenges. Let's cap it up with that. There are a lot of challenges in rolling out hybrid work beyond having to convince your boss. There are a lot of challenges. But if we take, again, a more employee-centric view and we say, okay, if I was the employee, right? And I think we've all been employees, and in a way we still are. If I was that employee, what would I want from my work? I probably would want a personalized work schedule, when and where to work. I probably would want an office that I can fully make my own, that I feel like no matter what the task is that I come to the office for, I can do it well. And that there is some sense of engagement that helps me connect back to my team and my company and my community. I think, again, the things that made the sort of like 9 to 5, 5 days a week really great. And I think if you take that sort of employee-centric point of view and you develop the office and the workplace through that lens, it's actually not that difficult to run a really great, really amazing hybrid workplace. Very much opposite to the call center that I used to go to on my bike, 5 days a week, clocking in, clocking out, only basically being considered productive or being considered a good employee when I'm behind my desk. So that's what I wanted to share with you today, kind of my bull case for why hybrid work is really great. So a big thank you for letting me share this. And now let's go over to the question and hear why I'm completely wrong. So what are all of our day-to-day struggles, right? It's like, again, how do we get the best people to join our company? How do we make our employer brand stronger? How do we become more attractive for people to both join and stay? All of that goes back to, what do people want? What people want is very clearly more flexibility.
Hey, Dan. Thank you so much for the keynote speech. Oh my God, that was so condensed and very insightful. And to be honest, I've been sold, right? Actually, you've sold me on this idea from many years ago. And personally, I've been a practitioner of remote work for the last 5 years, ways beyond before the pandemic. So personally, I'm sold, but I'm going to represent the other point of view today.
The other side?
Yeah, the other side. The side that don't agree with you and with me, because your argument is very convincing already. But there are other people who think differently in this world of hybrid work, right? So yeah, let's get this skeptical question started with a question that is actually sent in by an audience of ours from Hậu Trân. And he basically talked about the case of Mr. Elon Musk and Tesla, right? So, you know, a few months ago, Elon issued an ultimatum to Tesla staff, and he said, return to the office full-time or go find work somewhere else, right? So does this decision make sense to you? Whether you agree with Elon and whether you disagree with him? And if you were him, what choice would you make?
Okay. So shockingly, I'm going to fully agree with him. and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. So again, when we talk about company culture, right? Who is your company? What is your company, right? It's not the things that people always thought about company culture, like the barista in the office or the game room or the napping zone. You know, we may still need all of those, but real company culture is very simply, you know, what do you stand for, right? And that is basically executed through all the elements. And your work policy, right, whether it's hybrid work policy or a normal work policy, reflects that company culture. Now, Elon said, and he used language a lot less friendly than what you just said, Ruby. He said, he didn't say go find work somewhere else. He said, go pretend to be productive somewhere else. Kind of saying that if you're not in the office, you know, you're basically not productive, right? And he wants to create a culture where he says, well, when you look at what Tesla really is, Tesla is a production company, right? Tesla is a production company, meaning we make cars. So the real people who do the real work, they're not people logging in, you know, from their little, you know, hometown in Ohio doing business development, right? No, the real people who do the real work at Tesla are the people who show up at the factory and design and create, assemble cars. And he said, that is our culture. Like, that's the core of what we do. And therefore, everyone in Tesla should show up and be a part of that culture. Because I don't want to feel that, or I don't want to make people that are assembling those cars feel like second-class citizens, because everyone has this benefit of working from a beach in Mexico, whereas these guys have to commute every day and they have to show up every day, right? So he said, for my culture, it's important that everyone feels that same level of, this is what it takes to deliver the total Tesla product, right? It doesn't matter what role you have. And so I can only agree with him in the sense that I don't think he had to use that kind of language. But I can only agree with him in the sense that that's his company, it's his vision, it's his culture. And the people who will not fit within that because of something like this will leave. And he will probably say, that's great. I'm happy that you're leaving, because clearly you don't fit within Tesla, because we are the sleep on the factory floor people. So that's the Tesla case. Then you look at a complete opposite case, like Airbnb, right? Brian Chesky, the CEO of Airbnb, said, guys, we're knowledge workers, meaning nowadays the technology is there for us to do our work no matter where we are. And plus, we are a travel company. We are a belong anywhere company. So why in the world would I tell you that our motto for the company is belong anywhere? Oh, but if you want to work for me, you have to come into the same place 5 days a week, 9 to 5, right? Doesn't make any sense. So for that culture, it makes sense to say, we're going to go remote first. So Brian said, okay, it's remote first. You can work wherever you want, but I will organize once every 3 months an amazing offsite where all of our company comes together, so that, you know, towards that third challenge of hybrid work, the challenge of employee engagement, you don't feel completely disconnected from Airbnb and the Airbnb culture and the Airbnb community, simply because you're just basically, you know, moving from your bed to your desk and doing your Zoom calls, right? Because every couple of months, there's this big tentpole event where everyone comes together. And then, just like we talked in the beginning about this hybrid as a spectrum, then there will be a lot of companies in between, companies who will not take the extreme of, you know, we're a factory company, therefore 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you're in the office. And by the way, he said 40 hours, I don't consider that full time. So let's say 60, 70, 80 hours per week. And who also don't say we're remote first, you know, go work wherever you want, and we'll even give you a stipend to travel and this and that, right? There's a lot of companies that are going to say, well, we want to, on one side, acknowledge the demand from employees that they want more flexibility, they want more freedom. They want to feel that we trust them. They want to feel more empowered to say, my peak productivity is Tuesday at 11 p.m. Why would you require me to show up Wednesday? Because that means I'm going to cut my peak productivity time. So we're going to acknowledge that on the one hand. We're also going to acknowledge the potential savings from having a smaller office, having less operational costs, all the costs that come with a physical office space. And we're going to acknowledge the fact that we'll never be a fully remote company. So we're going to find that sort of happy medium, that sort of happy in between. And I think that's why McKinsey said, you know, most companies will not go back to 9 to 5, 5 days. Most companies will not go to a Brian Chesky Airbnb style remote work solution. Most companies will choose something in between, where you say, depending on the company, maybe even depending on the team and the manager, we're going to give you some flexibility in return for some, you know, whatever that is, whatever that requirement back is. And I think, again, just to cap off that very long answer, if you just think first principles, right? Again, first principles, a company is nothing but a group of people. So the better that group of people is, the better your company is. If you believe the premise that people are asking for more flexibility, for more freedom, for more choice, then there's no way to escape giving people some of that flexibility, that freedom, if you want to attract the best people, if you want to engage the best people, and if you want to retain them, right? I simply think it's not something you can get out of.
Wow, that's awesome. You have answered not just one of my questions, but about 3 of my questions.
Thanks for joining, everyone, and I hope to see you at the next.
No, don't go yet. I still have a lot of questions for you. So just to recap what Dan just said, right? Come back to the first principle where you respect people and culture first. and then make the right decision for you. A lot of companies are not gonna fall into the Tesla spectrum where it's a production company, or the Airbnb is fully non-niche worker company. A lot of companies are gonna be in the between. So you gotta choose the right approach for yourself. So next question for you, Dan. In your research at Dreamplex and in your presentation earlier, you talk about the majority of Vietnamese Gen Z want to have a hybrid or remote work, right? And this is particularly very high, much higher than other generation. So I am curious about why it is so particularly so high among the Gen Z, right? Only 9% of them want to work in the office.
The big Gen Z question. You know, this is a tough one because I think for a lot of middle managers and top managers, it's really difficult to even kind of get into the mindset, which again, I think when you want to be employee centric, which I think you do have to be, if you want to attract, engage, and retain the best people, you have to kind of like put yourself in the shoes of that employee, right? I think it's very difficult to put yourself in the shoe of a Gen Z because they just grew up so incredibly different, right? We didn't grow up with TikTok. We didn't grow up with, you know, the level of personalization that you're used to if you grew up, you know, from 97 onwards, right? Gen Z definition is 1997 onwards. And when I think about how a typical Gen Zer grew up, you know, and what their day-to-day looks like right now, I think it makes a lot of sense that they're asking for more flexibility. You think about a Gen Zer, right? And maybe we are, you know, sort of Gen Z in spirit, but for them, it's so normal. It's so natural to open up their phone in the morning and book a Grab to get them to the office, or on a weekend day. Let's use a nicer example. On a weekend day, you know, go to their favorite cafe, and based on previous bookings, Grab has already sort of like giving you suggestions around, oh, it's Saturday morning, 9 a.m. Usually that's the time that you take a Grab to your favorite cafe. Just confirm that that's indeed where you want to go, right? It's so data driven, it's so personalized, right? And that's the norm. If you think about opening TikTok as an example, you know, why is TikTok so much more popular than other social platforms? Just so much more personalized. It's so much more data driven. It knows so much better what you're interested in, even more than Facebook, even more than YouTube, right? My For You page is probably completely different from yours, right? Probably within an hour of using a new, fresh profile, it would already start tailoring it in a really amazing way. So when you think about that sort of, you know, way of living where everything is tailored, everything is personalized, everything is, you know, for you, then the idea of a fixed 9 to 5, 5 days a week in one place just doesn't make sense. So I think if you think more empathetically, more employee centric from that Gen Z's point of view and what they're used to, I think it's actually the office, and I actually think it's the workplace and the way of working. That's the weird one. That's the odd one, right? Not really all the other examples. It's really that part that really doesn't really match with our point in time.
That's an awesome answer. That helped me a lot in my framework of thinking, working with Gen Z. By the way, I've been managing Gen Z for in the last 3 jobs that I have, and most of the time I always have about 50% of Gen Z in my team. So that's explain why I have a little bit of a Gen Z-ish attitude. Now, our audience have a few really practical questions for you. And the question is, how do we manage confidentiality or the risk of employee working for competitors with hybrid working? Here you go, Dan.
How do we manage confidentiality
and the
in
risk
hybrid
of
work?
And the risk of employees working for competitors.
And the risk of employees working for competitors. Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, so to me, again, not to antagonize anyone, but to me, that's like a very employee or employer-centric point of view, right? Oh, what happens if I give people a bit of flexibility? What happens if I give people a bit of choice in when and where to work, you know? I have these like doom scenarios in my head of they're going to work for somewhere else, or they're going to leak confidential information, or this or that, right? I think then let's take one step back. And again, every company is different. So, you know, if you have Yip, if you have more information about like why you're specifically concerned about it, we can probably get more into the details, right? But as a principle, I think you just have to go back to, but why would people want to do that? Because if they're very engaged, if they love your company, if they're really excited to work for you, if the work that they're doing is meaningful to them, if they feel that they derive some sense of purpose from their work, you know, then why would they work for someone else, right? Is that like a rewards issue, meaning that they don't make enough money? Is that because, right? I think another really interesting insight from when we spoke to Abhishek from VNG, Chief People Officer for VNG. He said, I don't worry at all about productivity because, you know, our teams don't have time to work on anything else, right? They're fully occupied. And again, if you like the work you're doing, if the work that you're doing is meaningful, then why would you work for somewhere else? So I guess like I would have to understand the specific circumstances a bit more to really answer that question of, you know, what happens if someone works for somewhere else. And I think this really goes back, and I'm sorry to be so cliche, but a lot of the answers to a lot of the questions about hybrid work always go back to HR foundational principles, which is that, you know, yes, maybe in the office, it's a little bit harder to go and do a side job or to work for somewhere else. But how many times have we already seen, even if you work 9 to 5 in an office, that someone takes another job at night, right? And why are people doing that, right? Again, this is very foundational to HR. You need to support managers to see who in your team is showing signs of disengagement, who in your teams is, even though you're telling them to show up 2 days per week in the office, they're coming in 3 or 4 days just because they love connecting with the people in the office and love connecting with the company. And who are the people who barely come in those 2 days, right? Which again, why the data is so important, why one of the first components of the platform we built in FlexOS is measuring hybrid work attendance, right? Knowing, not from a tracking perspective, but from an engagement perspective, knowing who is at risk. But it's very foundational. And there's a really great, I know I've thrown around too many resources already, but there's a really great interview between Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, and Adam Grant, the really famous organizational psychologist professor at Wharton. And Satya is basically saying, again, like it's all about the middle manager now. And the better that manager is, the less you have these kind of issues, right? The less that people will disengage. And therefore you see the symptom of leaking information or, you know, like working for someone else, right? Why, again, like the first part, right? Why would someone do that? What's happening in their life? Can we sit down with them and talk to them and ask them why? And again, this is too hard in a large organization for HR to do. So you need to work with the managers, right? And you need to kind of understand from them, what is that reason? Why is that happening?
Thank you. That's a great answer. I would like to share my 2 cents here as well, based on what Dan said. What you're seeing is a symptom, right? And you might assume that hybrid work is the cause, but it's not. If your employee is working for competitors or they are leaking information, there's a much bigger problem underneath that you need to dig deeper into beyond hybrid work as a maybe false cause that a lot of people see here. So
yeah. And obviously, like the counter to any question about, you know, what's the cost, right, or what's the risk, is always like, what's the risk of not doing it? And I think this is why it's good to look at markets not like Vietnam. And maybe this also links to Min. So Min's question is about, you know, we all know the famous No Rules Rule book from Netflix. You know, we know the Netflix culture book. It was all about balancing better sort of freedom and flexibility, but also responsibility, right? Where you basically say, look, I trust you to make the best decisions and therefore, or the right decisions, and therefore I'm letting you some of that flexibility and freedom. And, you know, Min is saying, well, that doesn't really work in an Eastern culture. I mean, you just hop over one country. I guess we have to hop over Malaysia to get to Singapore, right? But in less time that you fly from Saigon to Hanoi, you fly to Singapore. that's a country where the majority of companies are practicing hybrid work, where that idea of people working remotely is the norm. Because it isn't Western to say that, you know, people should have some flexibility, should have some freedom. It's just, if you trust your employees, then that happens almost by default. And I think what you see is that, you know, the more that you do it, the more you stand out. So what are all of our day-to-day struggles, right? It's like, again, how do we get the best people to join our company? How do we make our employer brand stronger? How do we become more attractive for people to both join and stay? All of that goes back to, what do people want? What people want is very clearly more flexibility. So if you can sort of get over that idea, which I think is very much an idea. I've been in Vietnam for 8 years. I've been in Asia for 10 years. You know, I think it's really just a concept that, oh, those things don't apply to us. Just look at one market over, like Singapore, and just imagine that even 1 or 2 or 3 years from now, this will be the norm. Do you want to start changing your culture today, or do you want to wait until all those employees have left your company and all those employees have gone to the really cool brands like Baymin and like Savills and like Coca-Cola and TikTok, the ones that are already doing hybrid work? So I think it's really also about, what is the risk of not doing it, right? And I'm not saying, again, I don't believe in remote work all that much. I'm not saying, you know, you need to leave them completely open and you need to let go completely. I'm really saying, how can you balance better between, you know, what works for you and what works for your teams, and provide at least some kind of flexibility.
So as an employer, what to expect from a new remote staff, and how to help that person engage with the company, then work productively.
There's a huge shortage of good HR people. So if you're tuning into something like this and you're working in a company like that, please quit your job. Don't send this video to your boss as your way of quitting. Do the new trend, the quiet quitting.
Thank you, Dan. By the way, everyone, Dan is half Vietnamese. I'm kidding. He's been here for 8 years. He has a Vietnamese wife and a half Vietnamese son. So
he is really half Vietnamese.
He's not very strange from a Vietnamese culture. So using the Western Asian culture argument against him is tough. It's tough. He's knocked it out of the door. That's another really good question from the audience. From Zhang. From Zhang GY. If Zhang is here and if you can open your mic, would love to hear from you directly instead of hearing from me. Can anyone, can our organizing team ask?
Hello.
Oh, here we are.
Yeah,
hey.
Yes. Hello, Dan. Hello, Ruby.
Hey. Hi,
I'm Zhang. Yeah. And I have a question for you, Dan. As a remote worker, I'm facing the struggle of learning from college experiences. When I work in an office, I can watch and ask them easily. Learn by watching, I think, is much better than learn by documentation. So as an employer, what to expect from a new remote staff, and how to help that person engage with the company, then work productively.
Dang, thank you so much for your question. I love this question. Well, first of all, I'm presenting about hybrid work for a reason, because I think remote work is extremely difficult to pull off, right? If we're talking about how difficult it is for companies to move from traditional work to hybrid work, the move to remote work is a whole different thing. And I think there's only a few, I'm not saying it's impossible. It just takes a lot more work, and it takes a lot of different organizational design to do it extremely well. There are great examples out there. There are really successful, fully remote companies like Automatic, the company behind WordPress. They are out there, but remote is extremely difficult to pull off. And like you said, besides the Humu research, which talked about the difficulty of having a social fabric, of having that sense of connection when you're not with your colleagues, at least you know, at some point in the week or month, learning and development is another element that really starts to become difficult for remote workers, and therefore for companies, right? Because the whole point is, when you join a company, you know, you want to get people up and running as quickly as possible, right? Meaning that you need to teach them as quickly as possible. And if you look into any kind of like L&D framework, you see that 80-90% of learning isn't training and development. It isn't sitting in a classroom and listening to someone teach you, you know, a job skill or a soft skill or whatever it is. It is being on the job. And Yang, just like you said, it is learning from your colleagues, peering over their shoulder, being able to ask them a quick question. And I think that's the whole point of why we still need to come together to have that sort of moment where we can do that more intuitively. And your question, your sort of second part of the question about newly onboarding people, that's even worse, because when you're joining a company new, you don't even know who to reach out to ask those questions. You don't even know who to talk to. Oh, is this question too stupid to ask my very senior boss? Is there someone in the company that knows this or this? You wouldn't know it. So that's why I think, I'm not saying it's impossible. Definitely there are companies who've done it extremely well, but I think remote work is extremely, extremely difficult to pull off. And I would be extremely hesitant to run a remote company for that reason.
Me too, Dan. I find it very tough to run a remote company. As much as we want to have our independence and, you know, have time to ourselves, but 100% remote is so lonely, right? It's so isolating. You can do it for maybe a few weeks, and you feel like, if you're an introvert, you're like, I'm feeling happy. But after, even for introverts, like serious introverts, you still need to have social interaction with other people, and especially for your teammates at work. So fully remote's tough. I admire people who can do it, but I think I have to observe for a long time to be able to go there. Right now, my team is similar to you. We are doing hybrid, and we meet together every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. And I really look forward to those afternoons that when I can see people, give them hugs, and just discuss a lot of fun things together. Thank you, Dan, for sharing very generous ideas about this. So we can ask you questions all day, but we know it's been a while. So I'd love to ask you one last question. On behalf of maybe the HR professionals, head of people, or maybe middle managers, right, who want to adapt this hybrid model for their team, their company, they see the values, but they have some really tough stakeholders to convince, right? So give us maybe 1, 2, 3 really strong bullet points so that they can convince stakeholders to consider this option.
Bullet point number 1, if you're a true people person, is that the singular version of people?
Yes.
If you're a true people person and you believe that this idea of giving your employees a bit of trust and a bit of flexibility, if you believe that's going to be met with extreme resistance within your organization, please go to another company. Why are you working in a company? If you really care about people, why are you working in a company that's basically saying, I don't trust my people, with even a little bit of flexibility? So that will be bullet point number 1. And I mean it seriously. Like, don't waste your time. Life is way too short. No, because there's a huge shortage of good HR people, as I know from experience, just trying to recruit a new HR exec. There's a huge shortage of good HR people. So if you're tuning into something like this and you're working in a company like that, please quit your job. Don't send this video to your boss as your way of quitting. Do the new trend, the quiet quitting. The Gen Z way, the Gen Z way of quitting.
Bye.
Right. But I think, you know, that's really number 1, right? Like, again, life is so short. Ruby just mentioned the hourly statistic. Don't waste your time. Like, really don't waste your time. Okay. Bullet point number 2. Let's say there is some resistance, which is very natural. There's some resistance towards anything that's new. This is not about technology. It's not about trends. It's not about models. It's about the fact that it's new. So from that perspective, don't try and sell it as this, here is the stat about Gen Z, and here's why we need to move to hybrid, and here's all the things we're going to change. Try to package it, because you're really talking about, you know, communication, stakeholder management, right? Try to package it as a very logical, gradual move from where you are now to where you need to be 5 years from now. Change does not happen within a month. It does not happen within 6 months, within a year. So please just package it as a step-by-step journey where you're going to make some changes now, some changes later, and make it really easy to buy in for people, right? And it's really not that difficult to say to people, well, if you look at the type of work, you know, we've run a survey in the company, we've asked people, what is the kind of work that you spend most of your time on? What is the kind of work that you spend the second amount of time on, etc.? Hey, actually 20% of work is spent on this kind of digital online admin work that can be done from anywhere. Hey, why don't we give people a bit of freedom, flexibility? You know, we look cooler, we are a better employer brand. We can now put it on our LinkedIn that we're a flexible company, that we're a hybrid company, and let people do that half day or 1 day of admin work at home, right? Or whatever part of their job. So I think package it as something small, as something really digestible, and not as this huge project hybrid, because that's going to set up all kinds of alarm bells. And then number 3, again, just use that logo slide that I shared earlier. And there's a longer version of that, and just say everyone else is already doing it, because that is usually the thing that motivates leadership the most. And if they can get over that hurdle, that something will change, something small will change, just show that all these other companies are doing it and it's actually really working for them, right? All of the tech giants, they didn't introduce it and then 6 months later said, oh, no, we realized it doesn't work, we're going to go back to the old way of working. They introduced it, they're doubling down on it, they're furthering diving into it. So just show all the other companies that have done it before. It's okay, the water is warm, just get in, it's not that bad, right? And then you'll see that, hey, it's actually not that bad, right? People will not be that worried about it, they will not be that stressed about it, and it should be a seamless transition. We have 2 documents that could be really helpful. The first one is, since I referenced a lot of research just now, we've done a lot more research, and we basically did sort of like a bundling of all the key insights from that research, as well as our own conversations with people here in Vietnam and also in Singapore. That is packaged together in a white paper called the Hybrid Work Starter Kit, which I can send you. That basically has all the research, so it has all the stats. And then I have another PDF that I can send, which is a hybrid guideline template, which basically shows you step by step what are sort of the key questions to answer when I want to move to hybrid. And having those answers, those questions answered, will help a lot in selling it in internally, because you're basically showing that, hey, I've thought about this, I thought this through, I've already sort of like preempted what the negative pushback is going to be. I already have an answer for it. And again, that white paper or that PDF also has a lot of very practical examples of how other companies are doing it. And then not for everyone, because we wouldn't have enough time, but definitely for sort of the larger, more innovative companies that are making this move, we also have consultants in-house that are more than happy to spend some time sitting down with you to sort of help you prepare the case or help you sort of answer any questions ahead of selling it in internally, and share some case studies.
That's incredible. That's a lot of really useful researches and how-to guideline from best practice in the region and globally as well, that is going to come to your inbox, from our inbox to your inbox. This is one of the great benefits of being in people. So thank you so much, Dan, for your generous sharing today. It's really insightful and fantastic. It's so much fun and learning. Before we go, everyone, I just want to share a little bit about our upcoming episode. Next episode, we're going to talk about hiring, but the Google way, right? One of the best company in the world in hiring. One of the teaser for the People 2032 show, we talk about culture eats strategy, and hiring eat culture of breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So hiring is very important. Next episode, we're going to talk about this. You got to be back here with us in 2 weeks. And we'd love to hear your feedback about this series. This is our first episode. We are working really hard, and we want to improve this product, People, so that it become a place that HR professionals in Vietnam go to for really good quality content for you to become more effective People. And last but not least, you've heard from Dan. He's a very active LinkedIn user. So we would love to hear you share just one takeaway from today's session and tag him and tag me and tag our companies on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great Monday. I hope you have a great start for the week, and we'll see you at the next episode.